Hi, welcome and namaste to the Yoga Out of the Box podcast. My name is Marvin, and on this podcast, we try to free yoga from all its boxes, from all its cliches, and to make it more accessible and easier accessible for everyone. That's why we share like the story, the background, and the learnings of a lot of yoga teachers all over the globe. This week, I had the honor to speak to Adam Husler, who is like a world-renowned yoga teacher from Great Britain, living close to London. And we had like a super interesting chat covering a lot of topics about like what it means to be a yoga teacher, what kind of yoga styles he is teaching, and what his transition was from like beginning in super strong like boxing career and going from a lawyer job career to like a yoga teacher business. We covered a lot of different topics. We covered how important it is to have a variety in your practice itself. And I think there's a lot in this episode. So I hope you guys enjoy. Like always, if it was like this, please leave a good comment, leave a good review on the podcast player of your trust, and follow the podcast along. And let's dive right into this episode. Hi, Adam. How are you?
Good. I would have put my baby to bed, but I gave my baby a shower, and now my wife is putting my baby to bed. So yeah, it's been a lovely chilled out day.
That sounds amazing. So I told you already, I'm super grateful to have you here on the podcast because you're one of the persons I personally listening to the podcast. And yeah, I think maybe for the audience who not already know you, could you give us like a short wrap up about like how you came to yoga and who you are?
Yeah, so I'm one of the best yoga teachers in the world. No, no. So yeah, my background is I was never supposed to be a yoga teacher. This wasn't the plan. I've done yoga since I was about 17, 18. Not necessarily like a daily practice early on. I was meant to be a lawyer. My background is law, and my sporting background is boxing and ultra marathons. And I started yoga initially to kind of help my mind to some degree. I started it a bit at uni, but I got into it most after university when lots was going on. I didn't know my direction in life. I was going through a breakup, etc., etc. And I noticed that yoga has like pretty profound mental benefits. That, along with stoicism, I was reading a lot of that at the time before it became cool again. But I also noticed that yoga helped me be a better boxer, and it helped me recover from sport a lot faster. And so just straight away, I was doing this thing that helped me physically, helped me mentally. And I had no plan to be a teacher. Just a few years later, maybe 5 years into doing yoga, the studio I went to said, oh, you should do a training. And I just thought it would be a good way to enhance my knowledge. I didn't really want to be a teacher, but ultimately started teaching. And then suddenly I was teaching like 20 classes a week and had a full-time job in charity.
Wow.
And I left the charity sector because I was a bit disenchanted with that. But then I kept teaching yoga and then managing studios and consulting and doing social media stuff. Now, 11, 12 years later, I've been lucky enough to teach like all over the world, conferences, workshops, trainings. I've taught trainings for Jason Crandall, but also I've just now created with a friend the new training for Triyoga, which is the biggest yoga studio in Europe. And so I've developed that and I lead that. And I do a lot of work, beyond the podcast, etc. I do a lot of work supporting existing yoga teachers. So lots of CPDs, lots of business support, lots of marketing support for existing yoga teachers. So I'm very busy.
Yeah, it sounds like an absolutely yogic lifestyle, like super chill, beside the baby, of course. So do you remember what got you first hooked into yoga or how you like find out about yoga? Because it sounds like you have been already a lot into sports, and I always find it super interesting, like, if people come more from the physical part or more from the mental part of yoga.
So I didn't really do it so much for the physical initially. It was more in terms of performance. I identified that I needed a stretch. And at the time, this is back in the day, I had access to like yoga books and some of like the first ever YouTube yoga videos. And I started to do a little bit of that in my college dorm. And occasionally there'd be a yoga class like in the college. I went to a weird uni called Durham where they had colleges as part of university. That's not important. And I just noticed, I just felt better in myself. And then, as I said before, I really noticed even more mental health benefits later on when I was in that uncertain point in my life. And the fact that it made me a better boxer or it opened me up in new ways was just a byproduct. It wasn't the focus at all. Like, it wasn't why I did yoga. To a degree, part of it as well was I was a little bit lonely, and it felt nice to get to know my own body in a different way.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And really early on, I really identified it as being a practice of self-inquiry. Long before I read a yoga book or did any yoga trainings, I saw it myself just as this is a chance to physically look inside myself. And by connecting with the physical, I connect with something beyond myself. And that's what I identified very early on. And then, of course, further down the line, noticed it made me better at boxing, better at running, recovery was faster. And in terms of my physical performance over the years, it's been up and down. Like, there were times where I was massive, I was like over 100 kilograms, heavyweight boxer.
Wow.
And, I couldn't do impressive yoga poses, but I was still a dedicated yoga practitioner, but I couldn't do anything cool. And there were times when I was like 78 kilograms, no muscle, but could put my leg behind my head without any kind of warm up. And now I'm fat. Now I'm a dad, and I just don't have time for much. I do lift weights still, and I do some asana, but the asana I do in my own time isn't necessarily what I teach. Like, my style of teaching is strong vinyasa, but not strong because it's fast or aggressive. Strong because I get people to hold poses and build strength and explore integrity. So that's what I teach mainly, but that's not necessarily what I do myself most of the time. Most of my time is more kind of like yinish poses, mobility work, and actual strength training, because that's what my body needs at this point in my life.
Yeah, but I think that's already like a super good starting point. Like you said, like from this aspect of having all these different kind of backgrounds and getting into it, like just not because of the physical aspect. I mean, it's not just necessary to like practice exactly what you teach, because in the one thing you're holding a space for other people, right? And what you're practicing for yourself is more something you do because you know yourself throughout your own practice. And what do you think? How did your practice change over the years? Not just like because you turned on more into yin.
I think, like everyone who's young when they start yoga, my focus initially was, the cool dramatic stuff. Not
Yeah.
the very beginning, but when I started to have like a daily practice, when I really identified as being a yogi, what I cared about was the more dramatic stuff, like the arm balances, the handstands. There was undoubtedly a slight competitiveness, and as social media was beginning, that made me want to do even more cool stuff. And at the time, I was like early 20s, had a six pack, so it drew me into doing all the stuff that looked good with my top off. And that was my focus. My focus was extreme flexibility and extreme kind of like calisthenics. Then over time, I started to really question what I was doing in terms of the physical body and thought, do I want this much flexibility? Is it desirable? Why are there so many people I'm seeing going into this massive range of motion without control? And so I started to teach in a way that was perhaps more informed by a modern understanding of the body. And that's how I teach now. I question everything. I'm not interested in making shapes. I want to know why we are doing what we are doing and what the benefits are. And that's not to say there's only one way of doing a pose. There's multiple ways of doing a pose, depending on the body, but also depending on the sequence you're teaching and the intention of that particular sequence. I teach half moon in 40 different ways, depending on the kind of class it is. But I started to ask why a lot, and that's where I started to rein things back. My back bends were all about how to open the thoracic, not dump in the lumbar. My hip opening started to become more an exploration of active range of motion, etc. And then, as with many teachers, I'm sure, as you become maybe more successful or start to teach more, you stop going to public classes. I'd love to go to public classes, but at a time I was teaching 26 classes a week and teaching international workshops every weekend. Like, there was no room for public classes, so it became more of a self-practice, which, when people think of a self-practice, especially people new to it, they might think, okay, I have to go into a quiet room, light candles, turn the lights off, and do a 75-minute full practice with sun salutations. So for anyone at home listening, it doesn't need to be that. Like, a self-practice at home doesn't need to be exactly what you would do in class. It could be 10 minutes on the mat. Like, ideally, if you're new to yoga, try and do a class online or my platform, short class, just so you have some guidance and you're not going to injure yourself. But it doesn't need to be a full big long thing. And so that's kind of what my practice looks like now. I would absolutely love to go to more public classes. Okay. I would love, sometimes I used to love just going to hot yoga, not because I agree with it. There were many things in a Bikram class I fundamentally disagree with, but like no one knows me there and I could just turn off and get hot and get sweaty. And I used to love that. But time doesn't allow me to do that anymore. I'm lucky enough that in my life, I'm talking to you now from our yoga studio that we have in the front of the house. It's separate to our house. And I've got a gym in my garden. And so that's where I spend my time. That's where I do my training.
What I really love is that you really point out how, you fitted your yoga style into your life and not the other way around. Most people nowadays think when they go to social media and all these platforms and see all these perfect yogis, like you said before, it's more about like a lot of fancy poses and a lot of like perfection, maybe. And this could hold people back in the beginning, or even like young yoga teachers who maybe start out their careers, maybe think, wow, yeah, the self-practice is so important and I have to do it always like this, exactly like this. But to question the practice itself and like to develop your own style, I think it's like a kind of really hard thing, but super important for like becoming not just self-aware about yourself and the practice you're doing for yourself, but also like for what you're teaching.
Yeah, I think your self-practice is hugely important to some degree, whatever that looks like. But I just think lots of yoga teachers, maybe newer people or people that see stuff on Instagram, need to realize, we are not living in a world where we are full-time yogis that don't make money, that live in an ashram, that live off alms given to us when we go and beg in a village. We are householders, we have other roles in life. And I want to be an amazing husband. I wanted to be an amazing dad. I want time with my family. I also need to make money to pay for the lifestyle I want, which isn't extravagant, but I live near London. It costs a lot of money to live near London. I also want to read things that aren't yoga books. Okay, I want to engage with the world and go on walks. There is limited time in life. Okay, so we need to acknowledge that and kind of accept the fact that unless we know that our calling is to like live in an ashram full time and be completely of service and live in that world, that we're not going to have this utterly perfect, whatever that means, yoga practice. And I think one also has to think, when you compare yourself to others or are jealous of others' lifestyle, like you see someone on social media, think, oh my God, they have a perfect morning practice in that sunset location by the beach. Don't be jealous of someone unless you see their whole life. Like, would you want that bit of their life? Would you want their whole life? Because I know so many people that personally, are traveling yoga teachers or live away, and they're kind of fundamentally lonely and aren't necessarily that happy. And to some degree are escaping from the world and escaping from deep connection. I'm not saying that's all of the people, but that's not uncommon. So I think really try and avoid any kind of comparison or jealousy on social media because you don't really know the life that you're seeing.
Hey you, just a short reminder, if there was any value in there for you until here, please make sure to follow the podcast along and please leave a good review and right back to this episode with Adam. I see you not just questioning like the poses or like what you're doing in general, you're questioning a lot of things, like analytically. I do think this is also related when we talk about yoga. You already mentioned like the stoicism. Do you think there was a special kind of theory or like stoicism or like yoga philosophy which get you to this point of awareness, or you think it's like just coming out of your natural
I think it could be law. As I said,
Okay.
what I studied at university
Yeah.
was law, which is all about questioning, seeing multiple sides of the story. So I think that's why I think the way I do. I brought it with a fairly analytical problem-solving mindset, and I apply that to all parts of my life.
That's
But I
super
think
interesting.
some of it's genetic. Like my mom always says, even as a child, I would ask weird questions like, where does an island end? Like at what point is Sri Lanka no longer Sri Lanka? And at what point is it the ocean? Where is the line? Weird stuff like that. So I think part of it is genetic. Stoic philosophy to some degree has made me perhaps, less dogmatic and made me really try and to some degree step back from the world and see things as they truly are. But that's yoga as well. That's Buddhism as well. This idea of stepping back to see things, stepping back to the present, getting rid of the narratives, at least for a split moment, and trying to see things truly as they are. And part of seeing things as they are is stepping back. part of it then is asking oneself the right questions.
That's interesting because it's like something I think it sounds so it makes absolutely sense. And I think, like you said before, like Stoicism got like a big hype in the last years as well. Like if you study yoga philosophy or Buddhism and you get deeper into this like withdrawal of the senses maybe and like understanding the world or see it how it is. But I see like a lot of people again are just like going right into narratives and like falling into like, even if it's yoga, into another kind of dogmatic stuff or into another kind of trap of like coping mechanism from their life. So what really stands out for me is that you have like you developed a kind of lifestyle which is suitable in the modern kind of world, still as a yogi. How do you think you approach this with like having your consistent self-practice in your day-to-day life?
One thing I would say to this, in terms of trying to be a real life yogi, is you often see people on social media, maybe it's a quote they share, but it's like, the world doesn't need more doctors and engineers. We need more healers. We need more yoga teachers. I kind of disagree with that. We need more yoga practitioners. Okay. We still need lawyers. We're always going to need doctors. I want specialists like that. We're going to need the people that do the boring jobs, the people that collect rubbish, the people that design structural stuff. All these boring jobs we need. But what we would love, I think, is people that do those jobs that also practice yoga. And then they approach their job in perhaps a kinder, more present way. And they're nicer to their colleagues and they're nicer to the planet, etc. So I think we need more yoga practitioners and meditation practitioners, not necessarily people whose career is to be a yogi or whose career is to be a breath worker. I'm not saying you shouldn't do a yoga teacher training, but I just think in life, we need more people that are more engaged with the world. Not more people. We still need the other people and in terms of your question about like self-practice, etc. My view is just do what you can. There are days where I just don't have a yoga self-practice because I've woken up at 4:30 with my son, played with him, left the house at 7:30, been in London all day. The nature of teaching in London means you're somewhere, then you get a 40-minute train somewhere else, and then a 40-minute train somewhere else, and you try and have lunch, and then you're trying to deal with emails, etc. And at no point were you anywhere where you could have even had a self-practice. Like, although I'm in yoga studios all day, normally the moment my class ends, they're cleaning and another class, there is no space for me. And then sometimes, I get home at 9:00 at night after a day like that, and then I kind of just want to go to bed. And yoga,
that's even fully okay, right?
But what I can try and do still is live a life that has been informed by my formal practice. So when I'm on that meditation cushion or my yoga mat, that is for me a formal practice. When I'm emailing, when I'm interacting with the world, when I'm thinking, that's my informal practice. And that informal practice is the hard work. Okay, that's really hard work because often I'm short in emails, let's say, or I'm not nice at someone when they're standing in front of me on the escalator. And in the UK, you walk. You don't stand, you walk. And they're standing,
Yeah.
It's hard work, that is where the real work begins. So I don't believe necessarily the stuff off the mat or the cushion or a yoga practice. I think they're the informal practice. But I think it's important to have a formal practice. And you just do it when you can. And there's some people I know that will say, no, you're not a true yogi if you don't practice Mayurasana every single day. And I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that at all. Okay.
I think this is like an important reminder.
The people I know that have sometimes that daily practice are then assholes to other people in their life and not that nice and put themselves first and don't spend time with it. I'm not all of them. Some of them are the most wonderful human beings I've ever met. But I think we should try and not think that just because someone has a daily practice or they say they meditate for an hour a day doesn't mean they're interacting with the world in a more yogic way. It might mean that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that.
Absolutely. I think, again, this is like a kind of thinking into a box, right? And to free your mind from that is even like, again, I think not just for practitioners starting out, it puts like a lot of pressure on their shoulders if they think the formal practice has to be like this all day or at least half an hour a day, or I have to meditate and sit still for half an hour. Not everybody is meant for that. And I think, again, like yoga is more kind of a toolbox. and you can use like different kind of things for your real life to make the most out of that. So
on that note about the physical body, just to anyone listening, I would advise everyone not to do like the same sequence every day. Okay. From an anatomical perspective, that makes no sense. To do the same poses every single day without variation makes no sense for the body. You need to move your body in more ways. You need to build more strength. I advise all of my students to have 3 or 4 teachers that offer them something different. That's my advice to students. If they want to look after their body, any high-level professional that studies a body would never advise anyone to do the same program every day for life. It's too limiting and massive risk of injuries, which is why many yogis that have done certain styles for a long time have significant injuries, especially in knees and ankles and lumbar.
That's super interesting. I think even again, like having this modern kind of approach often comes like really, really, again, in yoga, it's not necessarily like that, but I think there's also a big gap between this community of yogis or yoga teachers who are like super traditional and follow like really strict systems and really.
What is tradition? Like tradition is just peer pressure from dead people. For me,
that's great. Yeah.
Proper yoga tradition is what we might read in the sutras, the culture where it's come from. That's what poses and sequences that were created 90 years ago. That's not tradition. That's just what Granddad did. That's not tradition, is my view.
No, this is amazing because I think it's super important to bring all these perspectives on the podcast, So thanks for that. I think even again, it's like super important to remember this, that it's just done like 100 years ago, 90 years ago, because I think there's even like a lot of, when I talk to people in yoga teacher trainings, they say, I thought yoga is like 2000 years old or something like that. And if something doesn't evolve, it has not the opportunity to become something really helpful for anyone.
And it's people need to like maybe realize that yoga isn't just the sequence. Like most modern poses we do aren't that old. Like Warrior 2's not that old. Some things are, like Lotus or the like, but a lot of it was created in a relatively contemporary environment, which is fine. But we have to think, this was, let's say 100 years ago, certain poses were created. What did we understand about the physical body 100 years ago? Like if you look at any Western exercise program that was supposed to be good for you, it would look crazy now. Like 80 years ago, we thought smoking was good for you. Understanding changes. And to let the tools we use evolve based on an increased understanding doesn't take anything away from the true tradition of yoga, okay? So I'm not saying let's rewrite the Bhagavad Gita or the sutras at all. But one medium of practicing has been relatively new invention, new in comparison to how long yoga's been around for, new asana. And that should naturally evolve. Like Richard Rosen wrote a wonderful book, on the history of yoga, and says, a lot of modern asana that we might think is traditional was heavily influenced by kind of like Indian wrestling of the time and like colonial gymnastics. That, you take a burpees and then you take a common prostate toward the Buddhist stupa, and you merge them together, and suddenly you have a sun salutation. There's so much influence.
I think again as well, the people back then had like, everybody is always like trying to evolve and is trying to experience, when I think even in the Ashtanga, when like Patabi Joyce started like creating the sequences of the Ashtanga primary sequence, he just started out from what Krishnamacharya did in the first place, and he evolved that, and it evolved over time as well. So I think even nowadays, people, if they would live today, they would like take all the modern science, everything we know now about the body, and would like try to transform that to something most helpful, right? So
most helpful to the people doing it. Because most people I teach, I don't know about you, but most people I teach aren't teenage Indian boys. With different body type, mainly Western women who's pelvises, or people like me, who's like 95 kilograms and 6 foot. It's a different body type with different proportions and eating different food and the like.
Do you think as a yoga teacher, you have to adapt with the style you're teaching to the class, or you think you find your own style of teaching and you teach and the clients will find you?
I think when you're new as a teacher, you should just teach what you've been taught. Okay. Hopefully you've gone to a good training. You just practice the skill of teaching. And maybe they're giving you a set sequence, you just practice. But over time, you want your style to come through. I think it's always important you have a why. Like you don't just add a random pose in a sequence because it looks good or looks cool or is creative. I think you need to have I think you need to have a why, but you should let your style evolve and then you will find your audience. Okay. And if you live in a village with 20 people, maybe yes, you need to adapt. Okay. But if you live in a big city, then you don't need that many people to resonate with you to kind of make a living out of teaching yoga. Okay. And it's fine. Like if someone doesn't like you, they'll find someone else. There's a chance that some people do find you. And there's loads of people that won't like my style. Like if a 21-year-old that just wants to move fast to pop music comes to my class, they won't like it. And it's fine because at their stage in their life, I'm not offering something that serves them. And equally, I have students that love me, but then they'll disappear because they need something slower, or they actually don't want to hear me talk about anatomy and just want to flow or do the same sequence every week at that particular point in their life and have something more consistent. So I think it is important you find your style and just be known for that. And wherever you teach, just teach that. So like whether you find me at a festival, a conference, whatever, you'll find me teaching how I teach.
I think it's like so, in the beginning, it's for a lot of people maybe super hard to like don't fall for the pressure, to try to serve everybody and to think, oh, wow, this person is coming to my class every day or like every week. And from one day to another, he or she is not coming anymore. So I think, again, when you start teaching and you are not like 100% secure in what you're teaching, it can be like, you're easy to fall for like, oh, maybe I have to adapt to this, or there are more people going to yin classes, or more people going to that.
Yeah.
What do you think? How do you find the
I think
kind of direction?
you should be reflective. Like, if your class is getting less and less people every day, every week for a year, something might be going wrong. Or if you're teaching fast Ashtanga, but in the place where you are, there's mainly 70-year-old people, then maybe you can kind of like reflect and think maybe that's not the right thing. Like recently, I was teaching some classes at a CrossFit gym just because I wanted to teach something in my local community. And it just didn't work because me trying to teach a CrossFitters, I had to tone it down a bit and make it more stretching. But then if I tried to teach to people that came from like yoga and that knew me as like a known teacher, it was then too hard for the CrossFitters. And in the end, I just thought, forget it. I don't want to try and make this work. This isn't a big deal for me. I don't want to like stress about it. It's not going to work in this particular location at this particular time. So you have to kind of pick your battles and really work out who you are trying to serve and the audience. And to some degree, if you can make money from it. Like I'm presuming that most people that teach yoga, at least some of their income is tied to teaching yoga, and some of their ability to eat and pay rent is tied to teaching. You want to make sure at least some of your classes are making money.
Yeah, for sure. But it's interesting that you can also point out this. I think it again like talks about a lot about like your own self-reflectiveness when you can say, okay, I tried this out and I reflect on the situation, and maybe there are certain kind of circumstances I have to walk out through, and it won't work in this kind of way. What would be the advice you would give like for young yoga teachers? Because nowadays there are a lot of like 200-hour yoga teacher trainings, like you said before. It could be hard to find a good 200-hour teacher training. What are like things you would look out for?
So in terms of finding a good training, firstly, don't choose one based on location. Unless you just happen to want to go to India, and as a bonus, why not do a teacher training? But if you are going to a training or looking for a training because of the education, what you want to look at is number one, who is teaching it? Who, not where is it, but who are the teachers? What can you find out about them? Have they taught in good studios? Are they relatively known? What is their lineage? Okay. What evidence do they have in actually teaching lots of people in different places? Like Find out about that teacher and their background and their approach. Make sure you go to some of their classes, whether it be online or not. Okay. Now, I'm not saying all yoga teachers that do trainings have to be famous, but you should be able to find out about them. You should be able to work out who they are and what they do and what they stand for. So definitely that. Then you need to consider, what length of training do you want? What fits into your life? Did it have to be an intensive? 3-week intensives aren't ideal, because you have no time to actually integrate knowledge. It becomes almost like a retreat experience. It's often quite transformative, because undoubtedly there's people crying and there's lots going on, but it becomes more like a retreat experience and an educational experience. My personal view is a training ideally is at least 3 months, because then you get time to learn, digest, revise, do homework, practice, teach. Our training is 3 months, and the people at the end, when they're doing their assessment, and their assessment is like a 3-hour exam, and they have to teach an hour-long class. Okay, and they're really good teachers because they've had this long process to prepare for it, and they're really competent by the end of it. And I'm proud of them going out, into the world. So I'd look at that if you are wanting to do a training. It has to fit in with your budget, with your lifestyle in terms of time. But definitely make sure you pick teachers that you align with. Because I know so many people, I've heard horror stories of people just picking random trainings and then just hating the teacher from the get-go. Or the trainings have just been really bad quality. And it's a shame. And that's why I've done so many CPDs for teachers over the years. And that's why my Level Up program exists, because there's so many gaps. So I try and do CPDs on sequencing. My Level Up program is all about refining knowledge of asana, but also about how to market yourself, how to get into studios, how to use social media, etc. All these things that are useful for new teachers. But to be honest, on that program, I've had studio owners as well join us.
Yeah, I think, again, this is like maybe at this point. I was talking the other day with a friend, and at the moment, I think it's obviously after COVID and because of all this flood of like a lot of teacher trainings out there, it's like really a lot of young yoga teachers out there trying to, starting out and figuring out how they could start. But I think, like you said, a lot of these teachers are created from schools which are maybe just from the background of making money, or just like from the background of, okay, we shorten a period of time and have more this kind of retreat experience. So I think it's super interesting if you talk about something where people can even, continuous education and go more into this kind of stuff. You already mentioned the business part of like being a yoga teacher is, I think that could be like a whole episode of like marketing yourself and stuff like this. But when we talk about like kind of sequencing, or like how to interact with your students and how to like hold the space for people, would you have some advice for like your younger self, or even like teachers starting out?
Well, the one thing I would say is, don't assume anyone's going to do anything for you. Often, and I see this a lot in the yoga world and the wellness world, there's a little bit of like entitlement, like, oh, I should, businesses should treat me in a more yogic way, or anger. Like, I know a lot of people that are angry at other people succeeding, and rather than thinking, oh, well, actually, on reflection, maybe I should do some work myself, they instead think the system is against them, and will say that, well, they're not yogic people, they're just interested in making money. So, as an example of like how much work one might have to put into this to be successful, like, let me just tell you about what I do on like a day-to-day basis. Even now, like over a decade down the line, like all the website is me, like constantly updating it. I built an online platform. I've invested thousands in cameras and microphones, 100 episodes plus into a podcast, which doesn't make any money. It's more just partly about giving back, but also about just sharing myself to the world and sharing good conversations and a bit of exposure, perhaps. Loads of events for years, like not even a weekend. At times, there were times that I didn't take a day off for like 200, 300 days for periods when I was just teaching. I'm not saying everyone should do that. It's unhealthy. But what I've sometimes encountered is the people that, let's say, complain the most. Like, I look at their website. It hasn't been updated in years. And a website's not expensive. It is if you get a professional designer, but with things like Squarespace, etc., you don't need that. You just teach yourself. You look at YouTube for free and teach yourself how to build a website, which maybe costs £100 a year, which is a business expense. Like, there are people that haven't updated their website They don't do anything on social media. I'm not saying you have to, but you need to do something to put yourself out there. You can't just complain that other people are succeeding and you're not if you're not doing the work. So that would be my advice to all newer teachers is you don't have to have a podcast. You don't have to have social media, but think what is your why? What do you want to do with this yoga career? And what are the things you do beyond the physical active teaching yoga that would help you make this into a career?
I think that's like a super, super good point in the first place. Because I think even before you start out with anything, you should be like doing the work for yourself, right? I'm not just trying to like, I see a lot of people even like when they're in the beginning, they're overwhelmed by all this stuff and all these opportunities they have nowadays. Like you said, then they think, well, I can do this and I can do this and I can do that. And in the end, nothing really changed and they end up with like a crappy website, maybe not like doing any kind of content or like not even putting themselves out and like really teaching in events or teaching in classes in real life, right?
And like, I don't like even like some, and a lot of it you don't always enjoy. Like I don't enjoy social media that much, to be honest.
Mm.
It used to be easy, it used to be just sit on the toilet, pick a random photo that you've taken and just write some good copy. But like today, it took me, I was thinking of the idea, so that brain space, then going outside in my garden, probably 15 minutes of filming, not a lot because it didn't involve audio, but it did involve me doing two camera angles. Then editing maybe took about 25, 30 minutes. Then writing the copy. I didn't want to do that particularly. It wasn't like the highlight of my day, but I still did it. And, it's got 20,000 views, which it maybe now at this point, it might get to 50. It might go viral, probably won't at this stage, but you just have to do that. Like I did one the other day. Most of my stuff does okay. I did one that was really edited, and it got like 9,000 views, which is awful for me. And it took like an hour and a half to get done.
Yeah.
But it's the nature of things. You just have to work hard, flow with the ups and downs, and do what you can because you have to treat it. Again, yoga isn't about making money. But if you are someone that wants yoga to be your career, and most anyone that I want to learn from, yoga has been their career. Because I want to learn from people that have taught tens of thousands of hours of yoga. And if you're teaching tens of thousands of hours of yoga, you're not doing another job on top of that. Okay? So we have to acknowledge that many good teachers are good because they've done lots of trainings, but more importantly, they've taught lots of yoga. And that is probably more important than doing like 800 hours of training in your first year of teaching. Actually, just teaching is really important. So teachers like that who are making their money from teaching yoga because they're really good teachers, I want to learn from those people. And I forget on my rant, I forgot where I was going with that.
No. That, yeah, it brings it all back to the one point, putting in consistency and like, if you choose to be yoga your career, you can't even on the other hand complain, wow, why do I have to do that? It's not yogic anymore,
Yeah.
It's, again, you have to live we have all to deal with this modern life. We're not like sitting in a cave in India. So you have to interact with that and you have to make the best out of that, right?
That phrase that yoga teachers sometimes use when they're complaining, it's not very yogic. They just pick and choose that whenever they want.
Again, like tradition.
I hate it so much. They will just decide in that moment because something isn't what they want that it's not yogic.
Yeah, Adam, that was like, it was going like this, but I think there was so much in there. I think even like for yoga practitioners as well as like beginner yoga teachers, there's a lot of value. So thank you a lot for that. If people now would like to know more about you, to follow your content, maybe like get in touch with you, what would be the best way?
So the podcast is called Honestly Unbalanced, and we chat to people that have tried to make your life better. So lots of yoga teachers, lots of meditators, but also like the founder of ice bath companies and some fitness people as well, all sorts. So Honestly Unbalanced. And then coming up on my website, you'll find all of this. I've got retreats around the
I will
world.
link it below as well.
Thank you. And the big one starting in October is cohort 4 of my Level Up program for teachers. So it involves mentoring, online workshops on business, on the skill of teaching yoga, on sequencing, on marketing. If you look at the website, loads of reviews from previous teachers. It is an investment, but you get one-to-one work with me, and I do give a lot of myself on that. So that's a thing if you're interested.
Great. All right. Thank you so much, and I hope
Cheers
to
for having
talk
me.
to you soon. Bye. And we are out again. Guys, thank you so much for hanging around, for listening the whole episode. Like you guys have maybe noticed if you have watched the video episode of this podcast, my background is slightly different. This is because I'm actually traveling. And when this episode is published, like on this Sunday, I just arrived like on the beautiful island of Florianopolis in Campeche and Brazil. And now I'm here for like practicing yoga, learning more. And I hope you guys do the same. You like use this podcast as a kind of medium for education, and I hope you enjoy. That's all I have to say. I hope you stick around until next week when we have another great guest. And yeah, write your comments and your questions for Adam and for me below in the comments below Spotify or in the Instagram post I put on the link. Yeah, make sure to follow the podcast, and thank you so much for hanging around.